Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this special broadcast of the Truth Bomb Riffs on Patrick Level Truth Bombs The Con. And I'm joined by a very special guest, a preeminent journalist, probably the foremost expert on all things Jeffrey Epstein and the Epstein files, a gentleman out of New York City by the name of Nick Bryant. Welcome, Nick. We are recording this on Friday, February 27th at approximately, it looks like we're about 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time, at which point former President Trump is being deposed in front of obviously all things Congress. This after we've seen what took place in the 4.5, I should say 5.5 deposition of Les Wexner and that peculiarity and all things. But as we get rolling into this, I want to do a introduction first into who Mr. Bryant is. And the Trump administration has declared that Jeffrey Epstein was not running a sex trafficking network for powerful men, but Americans know better. Investigative journalist Nick Bryant has been tracking the Epstein case since 2011, and he posted the Epstein's Black Book and flight logs online in 2015. Bryant's courageous act was the first quantum leap in our understanding of the Epstein trafficking network. The second quantum leap was in the Miami Herald's Perversion of Justice, the Jeffrey Epstein story. And the third was the tranche of 3.5 million Epstein documents that were released on January 30th, 2026. In fact, Epstein's Inner Circle put out an all points bulletin email on Bryant because he was in Florida investigating them. The email that warned Epstein's Inner Circle to be aware of Bryant included his picture. The tranche of Epstein files has documents that are drenched in evil, one from UCLA neuroscientist Mark Tramo as a MD, PhD, to Epstein brazenly discussing how to enhance an infant's sucking ability. Nick Bryant is a scholar of remarkable breadth and erudition. Got a little bit tongue-tied on that. And one of the world's foremost experts on child sex trafficking and Jeffrey Epstein. And for the past 15 years, Bryant has been working on the pyrotechnic Epstein story who trafficked and pandered children to a cabal of the rich and powerful. And he has traveled thousands of miles to excavate the story. Now, I'm going to also just briefly here, Nick, I want to open up and share my screen here so that people can take a gander into your website. And I'll post, obviously, everything that I'm mentioning here so that we can further the information that you are sharing with us today. But it is remarkable, and I would encourage everybody to quickly go to Mr. Bryant's website, check out his books, as I'll share here. And I'm going to be an avid reader of all of these, but The Truth About Watergate, The Franklin Scandal, which we'll talk about quite a bit here, Confessions of a DC Madam, which I'm very familiar with. Have yet to read it, unfortunately. But further, Global Perspectives on Dissociative Disorders, America's Children, Triumph or Tragedy. And the list goes on. And as you can see here at the top of Mr. Bryant's website, on the far right side, you can also see Epstein Justice. And we'll go into that a little bit later. But Nick, I wonder if I might have you further comment on this story, i.e. the Franklin scandal, Epstein and the patterns that protect the powerful. I'd like to start there.
I started investigating a interstate pedophile network in 2002, 2003. And I'd written a lot about children's issues. I'd never written about trafficking, but I'd written a lot about children's issues, including America's Children, Triumph or Tragedy, which is about lower socioeconomic children in the United States. So my heart is very much in children's issues. And I went to Omaha. There was this crazy stuff coming out of the computer about this interstate child trafficking network whose epicenter was Omaha. And they would fly kids to a house in DC that was owned by someone who had, his name was Craig Spence. It was wired for audiovisual blackmail. And this network was also plundering Boys Town, the distinguished orphanage on the outskirts of Omaha. And it talked about how the state had covered it up and also about how the feds had covered it up. So I decided to check it out. I was a little skeptical, but I studied philosophy in college, and I try to remain agnostic towards just about everything until I have evidence one way or the other. And I went to Omaha to look into this network, and I was truly stunned what happened to me. I was followed. I had a death threat. There were some very strange things on my phone. But what got me was I was talking to people that had tried to expose that network, and they were terrified. It was like I was doing an expose on the KGB in Stalinist Russia. And I ended up talking to a blackmail photographer. I ended up talking to a victim. I ended up talking to a former state, actually two former state senators, and a woman that ran a foster care review board they would keep track of foster parents. And they were the ones that initially blew the whistle on this network, because that network was trafficking kids out of the foster care system. And when I got back to New York City, I had a mentor. His name was Jerry Ballinger. He was a retired journalist. And I said, Jerry, it's true. It's all true. We were walking through Washington Square Park, and I was really freaked out. I was looking for snipers, on the roof. I had never had a death threat before. But we sat down and we were talking about it, and he said, this is going to be a dangerous story for you to pursue, Nick. And if you decide not to pursue it, I won't have less respect for you. And I said, Jerry, all those kids were molested and destroyed with impunity. I don't think I can live and having known that and just go about my life. I think I'm going to have to really give that story my best. And I worked on it for 7 years, and I was able to actually, I acquired, there were 2 grand juries that were very corrupt that said not a single child had been abused. And I got the sealed grand jury testimony and exhibits from one of those grand juries. And a lot of that, I had like a list of 60 victims from that documentation that I would eventually look for. And I found 12 of them. And I spent 7 years on it. And the DC component was pretty big in this, because a lot of the kids would be flown to DC. And I actually, because of the grand jury stuff, I had flight logs. And just about every week, there would be kids that would be flown to Washington, D.C. And Craig Spence was the pimp in D.C. Lawrence King was the pimp in Omaha. Craig Spence was the pimp in D.C. And Spence was a CIA asset. And as I said earlier, his home was wired for audiovisual blackmail. So I spent 7 years on this, and I knew the bar was going to be high because I talked to a number of editors and publishers about this. And I've been living it. I left academia in 1995 in the Midwest, and I moved to New York City in 1995. And I'd been a freelance writer for a number of years in New York City. And I had access to a lot of editors and publishers, and I had an agent. And I gave the book proposal to my agent, and then I was unceremoniously dumped after that. And then I got another agent. And then I was pitching it to magazine editors, and I could just see the cognitive dissonance bubble up right before me, because it became a familiar theme. I could see those.
Can I insert here? I apologize to interrupt your flow, but you just said that you had evidence that there was a CIA asset who was Spence. Did I get that right?
Craig Spence, yeah.
Okay. And we'll get into further evolution of what you transpose in the 7 years of effort. But you've just right off the bat shocked me with the level of, let's just call it quashing by a system in the shadows. But I wanted to ask you right off the bat, just to establish for the audience, because the information you're going to hear here And I know that there's probably many of you out there who are very familiar with Nick Bryant. He was on Chris Hedges recently. I think it's had 3.5 million views. I mean, I've seen you all over the place. I know who you are. And once I understood that interview, I took a deep dive into your work. But I kept thinking to myself, the more and more I explored your stuff, that I'm like, did you ever get a call from Rachel Maddow or Lawrence O'Donnell, for example, to discuss what is obviously, and I'm jumping here from Franklin to Epstein, but just to kind of set the table at that level of MSM, mainstream media, or MS now, there obviously had to be some interest in you, wasn't there?
The mainstream media has not let me in. As I was talking about earlier, I pitched this story to editors and I could see the cognitive dissonance. This is a horrible story. I could see them thinking to themselves, this is a horrible story. I need to help Nick Bryant, or I can just write Nick Bryant off as crazy and have a nice dinner with my family tonight. And I've been in the virtual green room of Fox and they yanked me. I was going to go on CNN during one of the document dumps because I put the black book in the flight log. And I was texting with the producer throughout the day. I was going to go into the New York studio that night. And I said, and I'd like to talk a little bit about Epstein Justice. It was a nonprofit that I started that's looking for justice. And I got a text like 5 minutes later that said, we're going to go another way. And then I was going to be on a Fox affiliate. This one was really troubling. I was going to be on a Fox affiliate. A junior producer, and this was during the Penn State, a junior producer had read the Franklin scandal, and she really wanted me on the show to talk about it. And a senior producer called my publisher and arranged she wanted to arrange an interview for me. So the senior producer who called my publisher talked to me for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, 4 minutes at the max. And I remember exactly where I was, and I was heavily caffeinated. I was pretty sharp that day. And she told my editor or my publisher that I sounded incoherent and that they would not have me on. It's stuff like that that's happened to me when I'm with the mainstream media.
So the answer is no. MSNBC never reached out. And I got to, those who watch my program know who I am. And yet it's very small in comparison to the information that I have, as do you. 3.5 million is different than maybe the 150 million that are interested in all things that you have. And I'm gonna conflate two things here just because there's just so much information we could discuss. But I want to just, be a coalition of this experience. So I've been in the medium of television and entertainment for a long time. I've been inside the business. I know how it works. We finally, in my evolution, had the highest representation, one of the largest agencies in the Hollywood apparatus. The people who represented our work were the same people who represent some of the biggest names that there are, but they weren't really going to the next level of information that we were able to acquire. And I always had kind of developed this mindset that, I think we may have been quashed because I was able to follow the bouncing ball because I do a lot of forensic type stuff. But in the end, when Trump, for example, in the 34 convictions in the indictment of, the convictions of Stormy Daniels, but all things, David Pecker, i.e. the Inquirer, going back to the 80s and the 90s, their whole apparatus was to quash stories, right? And so we know now, I mean, you may have sounded crazy 10, 15 years ago because you don't know these things. Now we know that there is an apparatus of catch and kill, and those that could potentially, cause a threat to the establishment. But you inserted in there that you prefaced the black book. We were talking about the Franklin scandal that led you here, but you're probably best known for those who know Nick Bryant and you want to do a little bit of work. You had the black book of the Epstein's black book. Tell me what that is.
Well, I got the black book in October of 2011, and that had all of his contacts, all of them. And I went back to New York, and again, I was pitching the black book. I mean, you want evidence? Here's evidence. And no one would touch it. And then a couple of years later, I acquired his flight logs, and I was really getting despondent about this because it just seems that there was a sheath of titanium between me and any network or large platforms. So I met John Cook, who is the editor of Gawker, is now an editor at Wall Street Journal, and he was game. He said, "Let's do it."
At Gawker.
At Gawker, and then, and what surprised me there was a lot of people that looked at the Black Book and a lot of people that looked at the fly logs. Actually, the Black Book has kind of become a phenomenon, and no one really gave me any credit, and no one in the mainstream media really followed the clues that were in that Black Book. And I was kind of stunned by that. And I went through another period of despondency because the Franklin scandal hadn't sold. And now it's selling, but it hadn't sold. And I felt like I'd burned a lot of bridges. And with Epstein, I just felt like I had to check it out. And because with Epstein, there were reports of various girls getting molested by Jeffrey Epstein, and a grand jury said that he hadn't molested a single girl. And that's the exact same thing that happened in the Franklin scandal. So I went down there, and what I found out when I got the Black Book, I started to call victims. And the victims are under massage, euphemistically titled massage. And one of them, the first conversation was kind of strange because I was talking to a girl's mother while the girl was in the room. And her mother had told me that she had been molested by Jeffrey Epstein when she was 13. And then I talked to someone else about being flown around, and then someone about being flown to an island. So I believe I was probably the first person in the media to realize that not only was Jeffrey Epstein a pedophile network, but also he had an island. And the island hadn't been reported at that point.
We're talking 2011. Is that the time period that you're referencing? Okay, yeah. So let's hit the rewind real quick because this is uber important. So in my work, because of what I've been able to encapsulate, and I've been on a mammoth journey myself for 14 years that had ultimately led me down this pathway that I had to understand the era of the late 80s. And I had to understand all things savings and loan crisis, which led me to all things junk bonds, which led me into the notion of understanding guys like Michael Milken and Drexel Burnham Lambert, and all of these giant financial apparatuses that were involved with all sorts of what would then become very strange oddities that would lead to this sort of government coercion and seem like black ops and things that may have been involved with Contragate. And I start to develop this understanding of, oh, wait a second, there's this guy named Adnan Khashoggi and there's other things that are happening. And this all starts to evolve. It's like money, guns, trafficking, sex trafficking, all the dark underworld stuff that seemed to be this enormous scenario that transcends from the late 80s specifically, even though I now know it's gone, maybe centuries back, right? But at the same time, this is kind of like this incarnation that I start to discover in your work in the Franklin scandal that was just extraordinary. Can you talk to me about Owen and that experience and ultimately what the grand jury did amidst these things and kind of layer that and then transition that, please, to kind of the corollary of all things Epstein?
The FBI came after the victims really hard and told them that they either keep their mouths shut, but there were some victims that came forward. The Nebraska Senate hired an investigator. His name was Gary Caradori. He was a great investigator, and he got kids to come forward. And he videotaped their testimony. And one of those girls was Alicia Owen. And she had been trafficked since early adolescence. And Gary Caradori, I believe that he got pictures in Chicago and of that network. And he was flying back and his plane blew up. And there's really the NTSB, National Transportation Board, said that it was pilot error that caused his plane to disintegrate in midair. So I think that that's a little problematic. But anyway, there were two kids that refused to recant their accounts of abuse. And the state went after Alicia Owen first, and it was a 6-week trial. I think it might have been the longest criminal trial in Nebraska history. And they tried her for perjury. And the jury was out for 3 days. I mean, it really was a kangaroo court. It's amazing that her lawyer was able to do what he did. But she got 9 to 15 years for perjury. We're talking, she was a 20-year-old kid when she came forward. And then the authorities
to remind people, Miss Owen was actually the victim of sexual predation, but yet she came from, let's say, the poor side of the tracks, and she had already been arrested for other things as well, right? Like maybe
yes.
theft. But anyway, because it gets a little complicated in there, right, in terms of credibility. But I guess the assessment is it just goes to show how easy it is to lie, deny, switch the blame, and blame the victim, so to speak. That's kind of what I see in the Trump administration every day. Can you kind of pick up from
that? The authorities really tried to destroy Alicia. They put her in solitary for 2 years. A kid in solitary for 2 years. So, and the state just barely got Alicia. They really I mean, there's so much malfeasance in her trial. In my book, The Franklin Scandal, I get into all the malfeasance in State versus Owen. And they just barely got her. So they immediately dropped the charges against the boy that refused to recant his sexual abuse. So they were, not only were they bully and malfeasant, but they were cowardly. Because here was the thing with that. There were 2 grand juries, a state grand jury and a federal grand jury, that said that there was no child abuse. So Alicia had to be found guilty to sanctify those grand juries. It was imperative that she be found guilty.
Okay, and let's remind people, though, at the apex, or the kind of the centerpiece of this was the $39 million embezzlement scheme at this credit union called Franklin that then would kind of draw in a lot of powerful figures from the Omaha community, right?
Not only the Omaha community, but that network, especially Craig Spence in Washington, D.C. I mean, he had connections to Mount Olympus. Just about every major mover and shaker knew Craig Spence. So,
yeah, you said CIA earlier, but okay. Wow. Okay, but so just to reiterate so you have this woman who obviously isn't from, like, the private school rich set whose parents are very influential in the neighborhood. She comes from a background where she's vulnerable. She comes to testify against
a working class. She came from a working class background.
And she goes to testify in this, being predated upon in this incredible network. And ultimately the grand jury and the prosecutor, because we've talked about indictments and cherry picking and indicting a ham sandwich sort of corollary, that it's real easy to be able to get a conviction. But especially if someone's vulnerable and they don't have $1,000 an hour, $4,500 an hour, tall building law firm guys, right?
Yeah, I mean, Alicia's attorney really did an amazing job, but there was so much malfeasance by the prosecution and by the judge. As I said, she had to be found guilty to sanctify the grand juries and keep that cover-up completely sealed. With Epstein, it's a little different because the Palm Beach Police Department was aware of, this number kind of changes, but it was aware of anywhere from 17 to 23 underage victims of Jeffrey Epstein. And they had the statements of 5, and then they also had corroborating statements. So they were just going to arrest Jeffrey Epstein on 4 counts of unlawful sexual activity with a minor and 1 count of lewd and lascivious molestation. They had the arrest warrant. They were ready to go. And then that case was taken away from them and given to a grand jury. And then that grand jury, Lana Bell Lovick was the special prosecutor, and she only called 2 of the kids and that had been molested. And one was at that point 16. She'd been molested when she was 14. And one was 18, and she'd been molested multiple times when she was 16. And she skewered those poor girls, just skewered them. And the grand jurors were referring to them as prostitutes. I mean, mind-boggling. So that was the decision of that grand jury, that there was no child abuse. And Epstein was indicted on one count of adult pandering. That was it.
Okay, so
Now,
go ahead.
go ahead.
I'm just going to say the corollary there. Just I want to, for the audience, I want to make sure that we jump from the grand jury that turned the tables on the Miss Owen in Omaha based on the Franklin scandal, but the corollaries and especially the tentacles that go out to DC and child predation and this sort of thing amidst the financial scandal was where you started, and then you end up with the black book, and now you've just gone to the grand jury of Epstein, which a lot of people are now more familiar with because this followed his arrest in Palm Beach. And the Palm Beach department did an investigation because they started to get witnesses, these children that got the red flags up. But then all sorts of crazy stuff goes on, not just with the grand jury, but Acosta, and we'll get into that. But I just want to make sure that everybody understood. But I think we should kind of close the door, if you don't mind, on Franklin.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, wherever you feel.
So one of the real unsung heroes in the Epstein case is the Palm Beach police chief, Michael Ryder. When that grand jury didn't indict Epstein on a single count of child abuse, he got very vociferous. And he said it was the worst miscarriage of justice in modern times. And he went to the Department of Justice and he said, you have to do something about this because this guy molested lots of girls. And the Department of Justice had a list of 36 underage victims, but they were worth of 40. And they impaneled a grand jury. And I just found out about this. I've been at Epstein all these years, but a lot of it has been opaque with regards to the feds. But they impaneled a grand jury, and they had drafted a 60-count indictment against Jeffrey Epstein. And one of those indictments was child trafficking, which in the federal system it's a heavy sentence. It's 15 to life. So they were going to nail Epstein with this 60-count indictment. And then all of a sudden, Jeffrey Epstein gets 13 months in a county jail, does 13 months in a county jail. And then all his co-conspirators get immunity, blanket immunity. And what happened there was Alexander Acosta was a U.S. attorney for the District of Southern Florida. And with Acosta, people blamed him for covering this up. And it wasn't, he was told to cover it up because there's no way a U.S. attorney is going to unilaterally cover up a pedophile network. Go out on a limb like that. It's not going to happen. And there's only two people in the government that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the attorney general, one is the president. The attorney general at that point was Alberto Gonzalez, and the president was George Bush. So it was Bush, too, the cognitively challenged George Bush, that ultimately called the shots on that sweetheart deal that Epstein got.
Okay. And that's incredibly important for my knowledge. By the way, I'll let you know that I'm interacting with the former director of white collar investigations for the FBI, a 3 decades long veteran that I interacted with on my work that reveals a whole lot of that era as well in terms of the financial, what would become the great financial crisis that they stood down on as well, which is quite frankly illuminating and parallel. But to go to the next step here, I think what I'd like to ask you, if you don't mind, is to kind of set the table before we get into your PowerPoint, because I think that some of the information that you provide, I have not seen anywhere else. But it's so comprehensive and it's so crystal clear to those who've been paying attention what should be happening in the questions within the Transparency Act, obviously, to the likes of Les Wexner, potentially President Clinton, and even Hillary Clinton, for that matter, that obviously haven't happened. And there's a lot of things that are happening at, let's call, ludicrous speed, right? But what we do know is that, and I had an interview recently with David Enrich, who is a friend of mine. I've interviewed him several times. He's the deputy director of investigations at the New York Times. And what we were discussing was their dump, of course, of all things, Epstein's relationship with with Jess Staley, J.P. Morgan Chase, and then they, got to the jumping off point, which would go to Deutsche Bank and so on and so forth. But it's 2026. Obviously, all of this stuff has been on the sidelines since you've started the investigations, and I can only imagine what goes through your mind on a daily basis, given all of the information. But I want to just try to set this question up to then lead us to the next step of this. So, mainstream media has ignored you. We know that Julie Brown did her investigation of peace. I think a lot of it was gleaned from information that you had brought forward that doesn't hit.
Some of it was, yeah.
Until about 2017. And here we are on the other side of all of this strangeness that took place with the Transparency Act, with Wakana and Massey, and of course, what Trump ran on, of course, with MAGA, and all things going in the back, to J6 and the likes of Q and Pizzagate and yada, 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 because they were all hungry for the Epstein files on the MAGA side. And now it's become this political hot potato. But yet you've seen what the Democrats have done. But yet you and I both know, just based on what you just said, that it was Bush the second, right, 41, that sat on this with his Attorney General Anthony Gonzalez, and that's Republican. Then we end up with all things Obama and Eric Holder. Then we end up with all things, obviously, Trump and at that time period, William Barr. And then, of course, we end up with Merrick Garland and Biden. So I just wonder if you could, before we move on to the next step, just kind of give me your sense of how you're seeing all this unfold, and what are some of the marquee points that are important for you to glean from what the moment that we're in.
Bush, too, built Pandora's box. When he covered up Jeffrey Epstein, he built Pandora's box. Obama knew better than to have anything to do with Pandora's box. Trump did his first administration, and his Attorney General, William Barr, is really a sleazy guy, dirty guy. And Biden knew better, or President Biden knew better than to mess around with Pandora's box. And I think Trump thought that he could open Pandora's box ever so slightly and then slam it shut because of these promises that he'd made about Epstein transparency. But the thing about Pandora's box is, regardless of how much you barely crack it open, the curse comes out. And the curse doesn't go back in the box. So Trump opened Pandora's box ever so slightly and slammed it. And he's been dealing with the curse ever since. And he promised that deluge of documents very early on. And Pam Bondi said, they're all on my desk, and I'm, which was kind of a joke. And then the conservative influencers came out of the White House with the white binders, and they were given the truth. And then when I saw the documents that had been released, okay, with the Black Book, I told Gawker, we've got to redact the numbers of the adults. And the number and the last names and numbers of the victims need to be redacted. I felt that was the ethical thing to do. But Bondi redacted everything. Everything. And same with the flight logs. So I released more incriminating information about Jeffrey Epstein in 2015 than they initially did in 2025.
Okay. And we're going to jump into that Pandora's box here momentarily, but I guess the last question, how much in your investigations and everything else illuminate, let's just say the balance here, right? Because I think a lot of people are still trying to sort out in their mind, okay, is this a sex trafficking ring for perverted, powerful people in this sort of vein of, give people, as gross as it sounds, the taste of, like however that works in that world, right? With powerful people, first and foremost. Or was it an intelligence operation, in your opinion, with all sorts of financial scenarios to entrap the world's most important people for obvious reasons, because when you have dirt on them, you control them, right? What is it here? Is it? Go ahead.
Epstein was an intelligence operation.
Did you say he was or wasn't?
He was.
Okay.
Epstein wasn't. And actually, Acosta, the U.S. attorney that gave him the sweetheart deal, he became Trump's labor secretary. And when the Trump administration was vetting him, he said, they asked him, why did you go so light on Epstein? And he said, well, I was told that Epstein was intelligence and to back off. Now, he's since recanted that, but there's a lot of other indicators that really show that Jeffrey Epstein was CIA. Probably working with the Mossad, too. And people always ask me, was Epstein Mossad? And I think that he probably was working with the Mossad, but I just don't see the dirty part of the CIA allowing the dirty part of the Mossad to compromise American politicians on American soil without getting a cut of that intelligence. When you're dealing with the dirty side of the CIA and the dirty side of the Mossad, you're dealing with the Gambino crime family and the Genovese crime family. They have mutual interests and they're not going to conflict.
And that goes back, really, quite frankly, to the 50s. You know, all things when I'm thinking about, quite frankly, FBI investigations, and I'm just going to let this linger here for the audience. Least we forget, right? First of all, there was organized crime forever. And second of all, we know the CIA had worked with the organized crime during World War II, during the OSS, and ultimately what it evolves into. And yet the entire Cold War was fixated with this type of stuff happening all over the world, not to mention in the battle with the KGB, you know, election fraud and engineering and all those sorts of things. But the broader point on intelligence, you know, for me, especially, you can't look at Epstein and think about this guy who was a college dropout vis-a-vis some sort of math instructor at Dalton that goes to Bear Stearns and ends up with Liquid Capital. And then he goes through the ranks with all of these clients, specifically Les Wexner and Power of Attorney. And I learned in that 5.5 hour deposition that Les Wexner's wife is one of the top came out of one of the top law firms in the country. I'm getting the name confused because there's so many top law firms in my mind. Do you know who I'm talking about, by the way?
It's in there somewhere, but
yeah, but the bottom line is, it's like she's not going to like sign over power of attorney to the multi-billionaire estate to go get the most expensive real estate in Manhattan, you know, and not be aware of where the money's going, because Les Wexner's testimony is all like, I didn't know Epstein. I don't know what he's doing. He came to me because I trusted the guys to be. I think you want to make a comment there. Please do.
Well, I mean, it's very disingenuous. Whatever. I mean, Les Wexner lied to the Oversight Committee last week.
That's what I thought.
And we can prove that he lied because Epstein gave him like $58 million in 2011.
Right.
And actually, the New York Times has even reported on that. So he should, and if you lie to Congress, perjury before Congress is a 5-year sentence. So
right.
he should be, I mean, they should have him shackled right now. And right. he should be on his way to jail.
Right. And we saw, of course, so we just kind of keep the breadcrumbs in this very, very complicated conversation. But of course, we just saw the UK, you know, take on, obviously, arrest Prince Andrew, formerly Prince Andrew, Windsor Manhattan, or however you pronounce that. But and then, of course, we've seen Norway. We've seen all of these other guys. And yet it's like this. I mean, you talk about cognitive dissonance, but before we jump into the files, I just want, you know, kind of a jumping off point here. Look, we've established that you went with the information, with the black book, to mainstream media. You had the highest levels of representation, and you got shut down by mainstream media. This as far back as, I'm going to say, 2011, right? You were the first guy to be able to establish, it sounded like, Epstein Island and all of these other things. But as we've seen this developed, and it gets, the Pandora's box gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and you've said outright intelligence and everything else. And those of us who've paid attention forever know that, oh my God, does the CIA actually have influence in mainstream media? I say that rhetorically and satirically. But here we are after like literally decades. Okay, let's just remind folks that the Pandora's box for you really starts with Franklin, right? And all of these corollaries. And again, like I'm saying, and I'm going to use this as a jumping off point to the next point, because I just want your sort of perspective here, and then I want to go deep into your revelation and your PowerPoint. But for those who remember, especially sports fans, the horror of the revelations of Sandusky in the Joe Paterno Penn State scandal. And as that story unfolded, and I've watched the documentary, and I'm pretty aware of how all those elements came together. There was kind of a gumshoe muckraking journalist, a female reporter for a local paper at State College, Pennsylvania, who started piecing together basically victims and victim stories to bring this to light. And then, of course, she had to go up against the same kind of stuff that you and I have gone up against in different, scenarios, obviously pertaining to, her local community there. But as that story unfolded and it went national and it ends up toppling, Joe Paterno and his golden reputation, everything that went with it. Not to mention, I could say about, in Boston and the Boston Globe and the, spotlight on the Catholic Church and yada, yada, yada. These things get massively covered up, right? And ultimately, in that Sandusky story with Joe Paterno, at the end of the documentary, this woman, or there was somebody who called the reporter who put this all together when the story was done, and she was almost like, okay, I've already figured out all the sequence, and she said, look, I've put the story forward, and the guy's like, no, you don't understand. I'm not talking about this era. I'm talking about 20 years previous, meaning that there was already this predation network that was there 2 decades before anybody even got wind of what would ultimately take down Joe Paterno. So here we are with Trump and things that we're about to go into, but he's involved with Epstein is back, I think you said 1989, and all of a sudden what's 2026 and things. I mean, we're talking 3 decades in the making. Can you give me some further perspective based on this long journey that you've been on?
With regards to Trump, or just
I'll just say the story in general, because we're going to dive into your power.
Okay,
but just
with Epstein, all his homes were wired for audiovisual blackmail, and the thing about it is, when I said earlier that the president of the United States quashed those horrible crimes that Epstein committed, that's power. I mean,
you're talking about Bush.
Bush, yes. And he's not going to do that for someone unless it's very important. And Epstein was intelligence, and the CIA was still using him to compromise people. I believe that that's the case. But Epstein had a long history with the CIA. You were talking about Adnan Khashoggi, and Epstein was in business with Adnan Khashoggi too. There's a number of nexuses between Epstein and the CIA. I think the important thing to remember is he got the get out of jail free card because of what he was doing, who he was. And I think that with Epstein, he compromised top politicians, he compromised people in the media, and he also compromised science people who were probably but I think the science people were probably the easiest to compromise, just because they're science people.
Well, can we go through this real quick, and I'm going to go through it faster, but I want to get to some specific points before we run out of time. Look, this is amazing. This is this amazing PowerPoint that you put together for the people that are involved with you in Epstein justice and so forth, which I'll close with at the end so that everybody can understand it. But I love this at the beginning because this is really the key component of everything. Until we see Richmond being perp walked to jail, there's still a cover up. What most Americans, no matter what their political stripe, their ideology, they realize now that there's two levels of justice. One for the regular person, which at a drop of the hat for a traffic ticket or some sort of violation, is going to spend some, exact a pound of flesh. For those that are at the apex of the system of power around the country, they can get away with what we're about to see and completely control the system, which is just so antithetical to all things liberty and justice for all, Constitution, the law is supreme. It's a joke. And we're about to, celebrate the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution with, of course, King Trump and everything that goes with it, right? So moving forward here, a couple of these things that are absolutely amazing. We talked about at the beginning that you're in the emails. Check a look at this email and walk me through it. It says here, just a heads up, and this is in the Epstein files, and this is an email that all everybody's redacted, but you obviously can infer that Epstein was aware of it.
This was his inner circle. Their emails are redacted, but the who it's sent from, we don't know who it's sent from. And when I got the black book, I started calling people in Epstein's inner circle, and I only was able to talk to one, and that's Sarah Kellen, and she was one of his henchwomen who led probably hundreds of lambs to the slaughter. And she was telling me how mean the media had been with her, and I really couldn't empathize or sympathize with her. So it was a relatively short conversation.
But it says here, just a heads up, there's a journalist calling around again, and his name is Nick Bryant, and this is what he looks like, so you're all aware. Talking about spooky, now that we know what the Epstein class is and what they were involved with, you were on their radar at the Apex, and now you're, I mean, wow, right? I mean, talking about credibility, and proceed with caution. Let's take a look here. Oh yeah, this is a very intriguing deal as it relates to Peter Mandelson, who of course is one of the many high-level people that are now seeing accountability. This, of course, in the UK. And the first one says, I'm in China. I will be in the US second week of May. And then we've got a response here. Where are you? Are you okay? I loved the torture video.
And this is where people run into problems. This email exchange was not with Peter Mandelson. It was with a sultan in United Arab Emirates. So one has to be careful with these documents. And if you go show the next document, this is from, it was actually sent from Sultan Ahmed bin Salam. And with these documents, and I show other areas where they're erroneous. So it's important to be very cautious with these documents. I've been burned a few times with them.
Got it. Now, and that's another reason too. Well, thank you for sharing that, because the DOJ did say that a lot of these haven't been vetted out, yada, 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 because the new corroboration, this and that, was just this dump. And a lot of people, I think, are speculating that somebody on the inside is on the right side of this, making sure people see these files. Because what I'm seeing in a lot of your correspondence here, I'm not seeing on Rachel Maddow. I'm not seeing on Lawrence O'Donnell. I'm not seeing in the New York Times, right? This is even, so remind everybody who Sultan Ahmed bin Salam is.
He was a billionaire, and he was from the United Arab Emirates, and he ran a very large shipping company that basically had tentacles all around the world.
Which were Dubai ports, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay, and that influence all over the United States, and there's all sorts of discussion about what's happening down in Texas, especially with that, I think, with Botan. Okay, so proceed with caution. In this particular case, I'm getting more ice creams is what I just jumped to. You want to give me fresh muffins and steaks. Again, and we'll go through briefly, what was going on. But Hillary Clinton yesterday was in front, and this is what was publicly released because it was private and she was trying to get the cameras in there. But of course, she was like the ridiculousness of all things Pizzagate. But we know that there was, and we'll get to it later here, in the Epstein files, there is really weird coded language regarding grape juice and pizza and, just ridiculous stuff.
With this, muffins and steaks, I conclude that muffins are muffins and steaks are steaks. But this is another case where the emails have been manipulated. Susan Hamblin did not send this email. You can see it right there. It was Karna Shuliak who sent the email. And a lot of people jumped on this, including Joyce Carol Oates, because there was a Susan Hamblin that had an adoption charity, but it wasn't this Susan Hamblin. But this Susan Hamblin shouldn't have even been there. Someone manipulated this document. I don't know if it was manipulated by the FBI or it was manipulated by someone after they'd gotten it and wanted to spread some disinformation or misinformation.
What again reminds me of intelligence, right? So you talked about, okay, so you just covered that. Well, by the way, here it says that these included allegations that Susan Hamblin had been groomed and procured as a 16-year-old, sexually abused by Epstein. Can you give me more information on her?
Well, this is lawsuit documentation from the UK. And the UK, there was a publication in the UK that had said some erroneous information about this Susan Hamlin. And she took them to court and they retracted what they had said. But she was definitely part of Epstein. She knew Epstein very well.
Uh, I'm just going to read this out loud and we'll get into the next because I think this is kind of uber important for the entirety of the nature of this information, given everybody's interest, but also, the intelligence manipulation. So cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort experienced when holding conflicting beliefs, attitudes, or behaviors. It causes mental tension, leading to efforts to reduce the inconsistency by changing attitudes, justifying actions, or ignoring new contradictory information. So we're talking like top level intelligence based on psychoanalysts and all of these other types of things. But the banality of evil, this was just really remarkable to me. Mark Tremo, and this is, again, through these tranches, all of these well-known scientists in academia, and here he's an MD and a PhD at UCLA, neuroscience, and he wrote to Epstein, was just reading today that newborns will suck on a pacifier more vigorously if it triggers playback of a recording of his or her mother's voice and another woman's voice. What the hell is that supposed to mean?
Well, in the context of Epstein, it's very ominous to try to get a infant to suck harder. It's really,
we don't even want to. I mean,
it's this one even got me. I mean, I've been at this for a long time, but that one even kicked me in the stomach.
Right. And then he's removed from the UCLA website. And I want to talk about that guy from Duke. I don't think that's mentioned here. That was a specialist in all things deception that just was revealed. But here we've got, now this one, make sure I'm on now this is the one that got me probably more than anything else. And I've got to, if I can move this over, I've got to increase this for the viewer to see it because this is just really the most unnerving of them all. Let's get bigger here.
And I think that this is from a very good source, this particular document.
Okay, let's see if I can read it. Okay, so the photo above, the photo above shows a girl, her face visible, who looks prepubescent with medium length dark hair. Several Caucasian men are holding the girl's legs open. Her genitalia is visible and gashed. There is blood coming out. In the photo foreground, a man with a white shirt appears to be inserting his hand or something into her genitalia. A round imprinted symbol of some kind is visible on the girl's leg and underside of her left thigh. In the photo's right-hand corner, there is an arm with a green shirt visible. An arm holds the girl's knee in the air. In the photo left foreground, there is a profile of a man with long sideburns, a beard, and a small bald spot on his head. In the photo's background on the left appears to be an unclothed top torso of a man with what appears to be a black t-shirt and blue shirt. A black t-shirt and a blue shirt appears in the left of the girl's face. On the photo's lower left, there is a green structure, which is hard to identify. The girl's mouth looks bloody and her tongue extended. There is a bruise under her left eye and a red mark on the left side of her neck. Her shin is bleeding, and there are purplish bruises on her abdomen. Recalls the actions taking place in additional image. Again, prepubescent, 12-year-old. Well, that was a different. My God, when I read that, talking about kicked in the gut. Do you want to comment on this?
Well, the source is very solid. I'll just say that the source for this particular information is pretty solid.
When I read this, I had remembered stories of the Khmer Rouge and some of the torture that they had done. Right. When I saw all of the things Epstein early, I kept thinking to myself, younger women that come from working class backgrounds or poor backgrounds in search of opportunities, some, maybe in the, early adulthood, 18 to 23-year-olds looking for college, those types of opportunities. And we've seen that covered, and I thought, okay, maybe they got entrapped and there's this gross, old men that are rich that, obviously discarded them and all of those things that go with it. That's different than what I just read here. This is like, I mean, if that's being covered up by all of these administrations, I let the audience, determine how they feel about that. But Nick, I mean, when you're looking through this and you think about publishing this, what does it mean to you?
I've come across these horrors for a number of years. And I mean, we have to proceed with caution, but I knew that there were very sadistic pedophiles in Jeffrey Epstein's network. And I also knew that some of the kids were under 11 years old. And these documents have bore that out. And I've been attacked for saying that the kids were actually younger than 10, some of them. And I've been attacked for that. But I've got that from very solid sources. And
we just saw NPR reveal that obviously, that there was X amount of files that were redacted, that they had seen the corollary numbers that was regarding Trump's potential alleged involvement with a sex act that led to some violence with a 13-year-old. I mean, so it's not out of the realm of possibility in my mind. You know what I mean?
Well, I saw this with the Franklin scandal, and I saw it with the Epstein scandal. Some of these pedophiles are sadistic. That's just, and I don't know if they get more and more adrenaline because they get increasingly sadistic.
And I'll just say here, I don't want to go too much into it because a lot of us are aware of Virginia Giuffre's story, but it says in the deposition in the year 2015, obviously 11 years ago, Epstein told me that he had slept with over 1,000 of Brunel's girls, and that would be the gentleman, his partner in the agency, the modeling agency out of Paris, who hung himself, right? I think in 2019 as well. But the claim here, and everything I've seen confirms this. Epstein, Brunel, and Maxwell loved orgies with kids. That is, having sexual interactions with as many teenagers at the same time. Sometimes as many as 10 underage girls would participate in a single orgy with them. I personally observed dozens of these. Orgies happened on the Epstein Island in the U.S., Virgin Islands, in New Mexico, Zorro Ranch, Palm Beach, and other places. Most of the girls did not speak English, and it was my understanding that the girls had been persuaded to come by Brunel, offering them illegal drugs or a career in modeling. Brunel was many of the procurers of girls. And a lot of these girls were coming from Eastern Europe, no less, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, here, again, for like, if I'm thinking of Lawrence O'Donnell and I'm thinking of Rachel Maddow and their audience, I haven't seen this coverage.
No, it's very unfortunate that the mainstream media has abrogated its responsibility to these girls. Virginia Giuffre, just about every man had let her down, and the system had completely let her down. Her father was molesting her when she was 6, and he farmed her out to a friend of his when she was 8, and then she ended up at this weird institution when she was 12, and then she ran away and would sell herself on the streets. So Virginia was a real warrior, but yet she really, I think, and then what happened with her, why she committed suicide, is she tried to commit suicide a couple of years, or twice in the last year of her life, and her husband was beating on her.
Yeah.
And I think that was the critical mass of trauma that she just couldn't deal with it. And then her husband also got possession of her kids, and she really prided herself on being a good mother. So Virginia's story is truly tragic. I'm really glad that her book is doing really well, though.
Right. And it was horrible, all things. But if it wasn't for her, none of these things, and the Massey Rokana initiative and all of the Edward scenario would have manifested to where we are. That gets this dump, which has more extraordinary information. Again, going to mainstream media, I have yet to read these types of things, because Leon Black, who obviously, I think he was involved with $150 million or more to Epstein for tax guidance. He's one of the largest hedge fund guys in the world. But it says here that, Black bites parts of her genitalia and violence was arousing him. And, here is, I mean, it's like when I hear these types of things and I think about the Epstein class being above the law, and if I'm thinking about investigations and somebody quashing these investigations, particularly a president, I'm thinking to myself, are we in hell? You know what I mean? It's just like, what's the point if this type of information is real? Go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you who's in hell. It's these girls.
True.
They're in hell.
Absolutely. Anyway, a comment about Leon Black and this violent sort of thing. It certainly matches the predation of everything else, doesn't it?
Yes. And we know that there's been other issues with Black as far as girls and Epstein.
I'm just going to kind of go through these because we're really pretty much out of time, but I want to get to some extremely important things downstream. But I'm just going to kind of fly through this because it's okay. Is it okay if I plug this on the description below? Share this?
Go for it. Absolutely.
It's public, and then I'll,
I want as many people. And actually, I can give you a link to the podcast or the webinar that I show all these.
I would love that. And I'll post that in the description below. But obviously this really caught everybody's attention. Pam Bondi, her back to the victims and saying we should be apologizing to Trump, which is incredible. But it really, she did say something in there that I want you to get your comment on, right? Pam Bondi responds to say, okay, it's fresh that you guys are attacking me when in fact it's been 4 administrations deep and where was Merrick Garland sort of thing. Do you want to respond to that accusation?
Well, it's true. As I said earlier, the Democrats didn't open Pandora's box. This right here is, well, first of all, Pam Bondi is lying because she said that there were videos with Jeffrey Epstein with children or child porn. And Pam Bondi says here that she would be more than willing to interview any Epstein victims. And I think it's Massey says, well, we've got Epstein victims here, and raise your arms if you're an Epstein victim and you haven't been interviewed. So you've got all these victims that haven't been interviewed, and then you've got Pam Bondi looking smug.
Having ignored the whole thing, and she's got 110,000 employees at the Department of Justice to obviously do the work of the American people. But this is what's, really your whole purpose, the child abuse and all of these things that have led to these horrible outcomes. And, this is an 11-year-old, that a picture of an 11-year-old that was sent to Jeffrey Epstein. Oh my God. And Epstein being cautious, please don't send porno links. I don't know how old these girls are, and I want to be careful they're all over 18. But here in the next one, it says he's no longer cautious. He says at age 11. Yeah, age 11. So that's the whole point, right?
His hubris eventually came back.
Oh my God. Now, I just, if you could just touch down upon a couple of these things, because I want to get to, obviously, William Burns, but just if you could give me just a couple of, overviews of Epstein's involvement with eugenics.
Well, this is Brian Bishop. He's not a biologist. He's a cryptocurrency guy. And he wants he's saying here, a spreadsheet for designer baby and human cloning company. So here's a guy that wants to make designer babies, and Epstein actually gave money to do that.
Unbelievable. Population control, underage pimping. I found this incredibly telling
and this guy's a big-time Hollywood producer. His name is Barry Josephson.
Okay, and let's look at what he says. He says, cool, I'm excited. Also, I've been thinking a lot about the question you asked Bill Gates. How do we get rid of poor people as a whole?
And I have an unanswered comment regarding that for you. But then if you go down, Epstein is hooking him up, pimping out a 16-year-old girl to him. And the girl was at home, and Josephson's going to call her mother.
My God. I don't want to go too much into this. Do you want to comment on this one?
Well, this is Robert Travers. He was a big-time biologist, and what he's talking about here is giving male babies hormone blockers and female babies testosterone to kind of create a hermaphrodite.
Yeah, and that was all over, quite frankly, Trump's campaign against Harris and all things public funding of those transformative, surgeries in prison and so forth. So I find that incredibly fresh. That Epstein was connected with that. Um, I'm just going to mention this, and I want to move forward. Shriver says that he believes girls mature earlier. I mean, the point here that they're just making, like you mentioned earlier, what's her name from formerly of Fox? She had that argument. That
Megyn Kelly.
Megyn Kelly, right? You want to
Yeah.
comment?
Well, I mean, she's saying that girls that are 14 have agency, and it's kind of weird. She was a victim of Roger Ailes. He was vicious to her, and now she's going to bat for the same type of predators that were very vicious to her. It's the whole Megyn Kelly thing is very strange to me.
Yeah, and well, I guess she's been very flexible her whole career. Forced impregnation, we could certainly talk about that, but it goes into this whole weird other stuff that may or may not have been happening in Zorro Ranch, black market babies. I mean, the darkest of the dark, and also there's discussion and scuttlebutt about people that may have died at the Zorro Ranch. And here we are with torture. Did you torture her? Our spy was captured after completing her mission. And I want to get down to this one. Well, I'll give you a chance to comment on that first before we get into stakes, because I know that there's a slide down below that discusses that there may have been victims of extreme sexual abuse at Zorro Ranch that may have led to speculation that there may be bodies at Zorro Ranch.
But I show that those two documents are very problematic. People have jumped on those two documents, but
okay.
I show that they're problematic.
Okay, so again, be careful what you see. The point being that they could be what? Just trying to mislead people is the idea?
I think that tranche just includes lies and truths and all kinds of stuff. And it's up to us to dig through it. But what I see is people going down rabbit holes. They're not concerned about justice. They're just concerned about rabbit holes, which really bothers me.
The salacious stuff and
yeah.
So, okay, I'll just take a quick steaks and muffins. Can you give me an overview of those?
Steaks are steaks and muffins are muffins. I mean, these emails really do show that. There isn't
literally steaks and muffins that they're
referring. Yeah, there's no clandestine code words here. Steaks are steaks, muffins are muffins.
Okay, but does that then negate the idea of pizza and grape juice?
No, now that's something different. And there's a lot of emails about pizza, and some of them seem to be in code. And I know that Pizzagate has been thoroughly discredited. But if you look at these pizza emails, they seem to be in code for sure.
But then here we go. Sometimes a shrimp isn't it a shrimp? Do you want to comment on that one?
Okay, so he is talking to Oliver Colomb. They're having an email exchange, and Oliver Colomb is a French diplomat, and he was in Sarkozy's government. And they're talking about shrimp, and Epstein says, here, I have an aquarium full of girls. And then Colomb responds, about shrimp, you throw away the head and keep the body. And I don't think he's talking about decapitation. I think he's just talking about, and these guys are heavy misogynists. I think that they're just talking about that someone doesn't have a lot going on in their mind and just use them for their body.
You include the pizza here. What's the corollary?
Well, there's a lot of, okay, so with this one, good afternoon. Would it be possible for Bryce and I to go to the Red Hook and have a quick pizza? So why would these guys be asking Jeffrey Epstein if they can have pizza? That's what's kind of strange. And then this is to Barry Josephson, that producer who we talked about earlier, who was with the 16-year-old. Hi, Barry. can you please meet Jeffrey at 12:45 at the corner of Lex and 83rd, and then you can walk 1 block to the pizza place. So why wouldn't they just meet at the pizza place? We know that this guy is at least having sex with 16-year-olds. So it's kind of like a drug deal where you meet at a certain area and then you go to where you got to go to get the drugs. I mean, that's kind of what it reminds me of.
Amen. Okay, so now in the nitty gritty for me, as we went down to this, and we already kind of touched about that, but here we go into, well, this was a screen capture. Hi, Harry. My name is Nick Bryant. I tried phoning you. Your voice box was full. I'm a journalist. I've been looking through your various communications with Jeffrey Epstein. You two certainly like pizza and grape juice. For my personal edification, I'd like to know what type of pizza is your favorite and what brand of grape soda would you suggest? Can you please comment on that?
Well, if you go up to the previous slide, Epstein and Harry Fish, who is a very eminent urologist, get together just about every month for a while and have pizza and grape soda. So if pizza is in fact a code word for this, Harry Fish is exactly, he's a very unsavory individual. And I called him and then I texted him, but he never responded to what I was saying.
So witnessing murder by perpetrators.
Yeah, these are problematic. It was reported by Brian Miller. I looked for him and I couldn't find him. There was some information that he was in the Buffalo area. That's where, but I couldn't find him. Plus, it's a very common name. And this talks about 2 foreign girls that were buried on orders of Jeffrey Epstein and Madam G. Now, this is to Eddie Aragon, who is a radio show host in New Mexico. And this guy is telling Eddie Aragon that he's got this information on Epstein and he wants 1 Bitcoin. And I called Eddie Aragon. I wasn't able to get a hold of him. But so this is a guy that's trying to get money. So both these documents are problematic.
So the point of that, what's damning about Jeffrey Epstein is yet to be written. Do you know somewhere in the hills outside of Zorro, 2 foreign girls are buried? So that could just be a bunch of nonsense.
Yes.
Okay. Moving forward, but God, it's really amazing. So we've seen a lot of this out there, but I just want to give you a chance to kind of respond to these types of things. The FBI report Epstein is Messiah.
Yeah, and this comes from a guy named Charles Johnson, who's a con man. And so a lot of people went with this, but here's an independent headline about Charles Johnson. Notorious far-right troll ordered to pay up to $71 million in racketeering scheme where he pretended to be a spy.
Money and everything else, but here we go. This is really the thing that caught me in a significant way. So again, yesterday we had former Secretary of State during the Obama administration, Hillary Rodham Clinton, say that she had no knowledge of Epstein, never interacted, this, that, and the other. But here we have Epstein and the CIA director. In 2014, 6 years after Epstein became a convicted child molester, the Wall Street Journal reported that Epstein had at least 3 meetings with William Burns, who at that time was Barack Obama's deputy Secretary of State. Burns would be elevated to CIA director in 2021 by President Biden. In a rather disingenuous reply to the Wall Street Journal, a spokesperson for Burns said he met with Epstein for advice related to transitioning to a private sector and didn't have a relationship with him, which is followed by these emails that show that there was an email from Jeffrey Epstein to people associated with Mr. Burns and potentially setting up a meeting long after Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of obviously, I guess prostitution.
And if you scroll up, I mean, these are emails where he's getting to get, no, I should say scroll down. These are emails, and then Thiel and Epstein are having a meeting with Burns. If you scroll down a little bit more. So he said that they met 3 times. But if you put in Bill Burns into the Epstein library, you get 324 results. Now, a lot of that is
Oh, wow.
Redundancy, but then a lot of it isn't. He's obviously lying.
Okay, I mean, look, we already established intelligence. We already established decades in the making. We already established the Pandora's box of Bush. But here we are with William Barr. What remind me of what Williams Barr's position during George Bush, the father?
He was the attorney general who covered up the Franklin network.
But he also covered up
and then he was the attorney general under Trump that covered up the Epstein network. And yes, he did cover up Iran-Contra stuff too.
And of course, he was the attorney general when Epstein suicided himself.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But the bottom line is we went from, William Burns to William Barr, and there's a continuity. Of course, you can't, anyone who has any idea of the last 50 years to consider that sort of relationship is just so obvious. And, but here's probably one of the last things I want to, really deal with. The billionaires ball, you've got this, this email, Peter Attia, which, this guy just got obviously sacked at CBS, but they're talking about an awesome dinner, the specs on the Burbank plane, but I want to get down to here. What are you thinking? I might be in LA Monday. This is from Jeffrey Epstein to Peter Attia. Where are you? I might be in LA Monday, Burbank, to look at the interior of the other BBJ. Tonight, dinner with Musk, Thiel, and Zuckerberg, and this was in 2015.
Well, I've always said that the upper crust is a bunch of crumbs held together by dough, and there you go.
Okay, but what we're looking at are the 3 richest men in the United States and the world. Thiel being, all things, Palantir and what that means. We know who Zuckerberg is. Musk. I mean, we went from William Burns after he's already been convicted, Epstein, and then we've got after he's been convicted, meeting with the most important people, the most powerful billionaires in the world, especially, i.e., if you want to infer Zuckerberg with, Facebook, and then Thiel and Musk. I mean, it doesn't paint a clear picture that this was much more than what we're being fed.
Well, what we're being fed is Epstein and Maxwell acted completely alone. And that's obviously a sham. It's absurd.
It's absurd. All right. Well, we all know about Elon procures. I think I'll just leave this to everybody else, but I want to get down here to the bottom, and you did mention this, the upper crust. But let's scan down to the bottom, because I love what you have put together. Your work is tireless. It's unbelievable on behalf of the victims that you fight for and you champion every day against all odds. And let's just take a look at the last couple of. So every seat in the House is up for election in 2026. Half the Senate is up for election in 2026. Challengers are not in DC yet, but they're reachable and they want to stand out. You're effectively, challengers want to hear from you. They need grassroots support. This is an easy ask for every challenger. So we're looking at a sort of coordinated effort, a political effort, a national movement in 50 states across 400 congressional districts, and you're looking for people to come on to Epstein justice, that until we see rich men being perp walked to jail, then the whole thing's a cover-up, which has been going on for decades. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. I will put all of these links down below, and including what you said you're going to send forward. But I want to give you final comments here. Well, let me just say, thank you for all your work, Nick. Thank you for your
welcome.
Thank you for doing this. And I just, because I know on the financial side, this, as much as there's thousands of victims of this, there was also a predatory network of financialization that has encompassed and hijacked the entirety of our the financial system, everything else associated with it, overcome the law. I wonder what your final comments are, given you're sort of looking back through the rear view mirror of your journey in context to where we are today and what you want people to not only take away from your work and your efforts moving forward, but maybe kind of put some corners on, if you can, what this all means to you.
Well, we have to do something about this. We cannot let the government cover up the molestation of children. And blackmail, I think, plays an integral part in our political system. That's why Epstein justice is so important. We want a solution. You've got people going down rabbit holes with these documents, but the important thing is a solution. And Epstein justice, we want an independent congressional commission, and that independent congressional commissions incorporate non-government personnel for investigations, and that's what we would need. If this goes to a subcommittee, it'll die on the vine. So we need an independent congressional commission, and we have two objectives with that independent congressional commission. One, we want to know why the government covered up child trafficking, and two, we want the perpetrators to be prosecuted. Very simple. With an independent congressional commission, you don't need a presidential signature. You do need a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate. And we're putting together, or actually we've put together Facebook groups by state so people can put pressure on their federal legislators to make this happen, because this has to happen. This is going to be the best chance in our lifetime to clean out our government. And it might be the only chance before our leaders take us off a cliff.
No, I totally agree with that. So you're talking about a national movement, a civil rights-like movement for justice that puts people who champion this effort into Congress to further what's been going on. But here we have, meanwhile, this the reality, right? We've already talked about it, from Bush through the Pandora's box of the Democrats and so on and so forth. But yesterday, Monday on the People's State of the Union, of course, I saw Epstein victims alongside Rokana, Massey, Garcia, and then, of course, none other than Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer's been there throughout, right? So it's like, how do you give people an understanding of how to see the forest for the trees here, and what do you emphasize? I know what I just heard from you is keep it simple, stupid, but at the same time, it's kind of like, no, there's a reason why this stuff has been covered up for decades and will continue to, unless we have people willing to force, shatter the illusion, which is what we've done in this dialogue. And so, how do you express, where you're coming from, given all of these sorts of problematic scenarios?
Well, as I said, it's time for us to end this. It's time for us to end. If you cover up a crime, you're aiding and abetting that crime. So our government's been aiding and abetting child trafficking for multiple years. And it's time to stop. And it's also time to get the people that are compromised out of our government, so Americans can come back to a decent life. I mean, the middle class is just disintegrated. And the middle class really was the most powerful part of America. And I believe that the middle class is disintegrated because of people in Washington and the policies that they put together. And there's all kinds of other problems too.
Yeah, well, absolute power corrupts absolutely. We live in a tyrannical class, which has been deemed the Epstein class. And I want to remind everybody that you can check out Nick Bryant at, it looks like Nick Bryant, I think it's nickbryant.com, but his
NickBryantNYC.com, yeah.
NickBryantNYC.com. The truth about Watergate, which I can't wait to delve into, the Franklin scandal, confessions of a DC madam, and then probably most importantly, on the upper right-hand side here, you can scroll to Epstein Justice. And it's really been a great pleasure and honor to speak with you. I am so appreciative of your time. And again, it just goes to show people that independent journalists are out there doing the hard work that the entire system is covering up. And like Nick said earlier, we'll never have a better time than now, given the information and the momentum and really the bipartisan support for bringing in people to face justice that were involved with something as heinous as these child sex trafficking and crimes and so forth. So Please check out all of Nick's work. Please check out thecleannewdeal.org if you feel absolutely filthy by the pollution of corruption. We have another solution as well for millions to take a gander at, and hopefully we can join forces, Nick, downstream in order to form a more perfect union, because it certainly is, the time is now. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Patrick. Have a good night.
Take care.
Bye.